I'm joined tonight by former Congressman Alan Grayson of Florida, who is running for the seat one more time, some redistricting. Congressman, good to have you with us tonight. You've heard this kind of rhetoric out there before. Do you believe Rick Santorum needs to be held accountable and give us a name as to who he was talking about in Europe back in the 40s and comparing it to President Obama?
Well, of course, but Rick Santorum says things like that almost every day. In the very same speech, Ed, he said, among other things, that President Obama is the worst president we've had on security. The very worst. The worst president we've had on the economy. And he said that President Obama wants higher gas prices. This is part of the vilification and demonizing of the president that you hear all the time on Glenn Beck. You hear all the time on Rush Limbaugh. You hear all the time on Sean Hannity's show. And he's simply articulating that for that same audience, the Tea Party fanatics who end up determining the Republican primary.
I mean, in that speech, wasn't he drawing a parallel as to what Europe and the world faced back in 1940 and what we as a country face and what the world is looking at right now, and said, well, you know, he was a nice guy, but they, you know, kind of made a mistake. And it was very clear to me he was talking about Adolf Hitler and making the comparison to the President of the United States. Is it a deliberate strategy, in your opinion?
It's a deliberate strategy to vilify the president, to make it seem that he's an illegitimate president. We've seen this since before he was elected. And it won't work because 67 million Americans voted for him last time. More than 67 million are going to vote for him this time. But what he's doing is playing to that particular paranoid audience in the paranoid style of American politics and trying to make them angry and fearful of Barack Obama to the point where they will support him. That's what he's doing, and I think he's doing it consciously.
And we're talking about the man who now leads in the national poll by 10 points over his closest challenger, and that would be Mitt Romney. What do you make of that?
Well, only a tiny fraction of the populace ever has anything with Republican primaries. The turnout in Maine last week was less than 0.5% of the population. 1.3 million people live in Maine. 5,000 voted in their primary to choose the next president. And we're talking about the absolute fringe, the absolute radical fringe. And these are the people who are going to generate the opponent to Barack Obama in the next election. God help us all.
Why would Santorum's spokesperson say Islamic policies when talking about environmental policies?
Again, it's no different from what you hear all the time on Fox News and on hate radio. Rick Santorum, like millions of other Americans, has been immersed in hate radio and Fox News for years, for decades. And now this is the result of it. He's the Tea Party candidate. He's the one that they really want, and this is what you see. But there is a gaping chasm between the Tea Party and the rest of America, and they're going to generate the next Republican candidate, whether we like it or not. I think people would love to see an honest debate between two honest people with different points of view, but you're not going to see that because the Tea Party is going to choose a candidate that spews nothing but hatred. That's exactly what Rick Santorum is doing, has done, and will do.
Alan Grayson, great to have you with us tonight. Thanks so much for joining us.